One of these movies is about a man locked in a room for 35 years by his own demented mother, and they actually abused real animals on camera to make it. Hollywood tried to bury it, but that's just the beginning. Here are 10 movies from the 90s that were too disturbing for mainstream. Rolf de Heer had this idea stuck in his head throughout the whole 80s. A man named Bubby imprisoned in his own home for 35 years by his demented mother. She's using him for her own sick pleasure and has convinced him that stepping outside will kill him. When Bubby finally realizes that's not true, he kills his parents and escapes. They wanted to make the movie as disorienting and disturbing as possible. So when filming started, they tried things nobody had done before. Kept switching cinematographers mid-production so different parts of the movie would have completely different visual styles. Hired non-actors and sometimes filmed them without them even knowing they were in a movie. That was problematic enough, but then there was the stuff with the animals. In the film, Bubby's got a pet cat and there's this scene where it gets wrapped in plastic. When the movie came out in Europe, animal rights groups went ballistic. They claimed the cat was actually suffocated to death on camera and started organizing a nationwide boycott of Australian products. The director denied it ever happened, said it wasn't true. But by that point, the damage was done. The movie had this reputation as something genuinely sickening, and it basically disappeared after that. Richard Stanley was trying to make a horror movie about a woman running from her abusive husband. She picks up a hitchhiker that might be some kind of ancient demon possessing people. Pretty standard horror setup. But the production was a nightmare. He had trouble getting funding, trouble during shooting, trouble with marketing. Everything that could go wrong did. The weird thing is, if you actually watch what Stanley shot, you can see he was onto something. The movie looks incredible. He filmed it in African desert landscapes, and the visuals are genuinely stunning. He mixed classic horror stuff with African folklore in ways that were really interesting and original. But the producers didn't care about any of that. They took the film away from Stanley and cut more than 30 minutes out of it. Just hacked it to pieces without asking him. The version that got released wasn't even close to what he'd made. So the movie that came out was this mangled thing that didn't make sense, and critics responded accordingly. It got lukewarm reviews and disappeared. Stanley's career already had problems, and this just added another failure to the list. Paul Schrader wrote Taxi Driver and Raging Bull for Scorsese, but he also directed his own movies. Affliction was one of them. He got Nick Nolte for the lead, Sissy Spacek and Willem Dafoe in supporting roles. It's set in frozen New England wilderness, and the whole movie has this cold, bitter feeling to it. Nolte plays a small-town cop who's falling apart, doubting everything in his life. The movie builds slowly and then hits you with this ending that just destroys you. Critics recognized it was good. It got some positive reviews, but it never became a big deal. The box office was nothing special, and over time it just got forgotten. When people talk about great 90s movies now, Affliction doesn't come up. When they list Paul Schrader's best work, they usually skip right over it. It's just sitting there, this really powerful film that nobody remembers. Susan Sarandon and James Spader in an erotic drama written by the guy who would later write The Silence of the Lambs. This should have been a hit. It's about lust and grief and how people deal with loss. Spader was doing a lot of erotic thriller stuff back then, and this fit right into that. The movie has some moments where it tries to get surreal and it doesn't quite work, but overall it's really good. The characters are compelling, the central relationship feels real. But it wasn't a critical darling when it came out. The box office was disappointing, and those two things together meant it just vanished. Now it exists in complete obscurity. Only a few film nerds even know it's out there. Before the TV show, there was a movie, shot in black and white on basically no budget, following ex-cons and their families in this documentary style. It's way grittier and more serious than what the show became. The whole thing looks like a student film because that's essentially what it was. Nobody made it thinking critics or mainstream audiences would see it. It was just a test run for the concept and characters. Then the TV show happened and became huge. Everybody knows Trailer Park Boys from the series, but almost nobody knows the original movie exists. It's just that thing that came before the show, even though it's arguably better than a lot of what came after. The movie got buried by its own success. The TV show overshadowed it so completely that it might as well not exist. There's this pattern that happens with movies sometimes. A director makes something that gets attention, builds a reputation, and then they make something even more extreme thinking they can push further. And instead of becoming their masterpiece, it just vanishes. That happened to Alex de la Iglesia in 1997. He had made Day of the Beast a couple years earlier, and it became this cult thing in Spain, so he decides to go bigger. A voodoo road movie with Rosie Perez and Javier Bardem committing increasingly violent crimes on their way to Las Vegas. This is before Bardem was the guy from No Country for Old Men. He was just a Spanish actor willing to do absolutely insane shit on camera. The movie that came out of that is brutal in a way that's hard to describe. It's got this fever dream energy where you're never quite sure how far it's going to go. But despite its flaws, it's a hell of an experience, and yet almost nobody's seen it. In 1997, Kiyoshi Kurosawa made a thriller called Cure, and critics immediately said it was something special. They called it a masterpiece of terror, said it was on its way to becoming a classic of Japanese horror. A year later, Ring came out. And that was it for Cure. Ring became the face of Japanese horror worldwide, got remade in America, spawned to the whole J-horror boom. Cure got completely buried under it. Then came Audition, Dark Water, all these other films that got international attention, while Cure kept getting ignored. The weird part is that filmmakers know about it. Pan Joon-ho talked about Cure as a major influence on his work. Other directors from that generation cite it constantly, but most people never heard of it. The movie's about people committing murders with no memory of doing it, and it builds this slow, creeping dread that's genuinely terrifying. But it came out at exactly the wrong time, got overshadowed by bigger films, and never recovered. Czech filmmaker Jan Svankmajer made Alice in Wonderland, which is probably his most famous work, if you can call anything he did famous. The guy's a legend in surrealist cinema, but operates in this extremely niche space. In 1996, he made Conspirators of Pleasure, which is about people with bizarre sexual fetishes forming a club to indulge their fantasies. The whole thing is virtually dialogue-free, focused entirely on visuals, and despite being about sex, it's not actually explicit. It's all suggested surrealist imagery, which means if you're not already familiar with this style, the movie feels impossible to sit through. It's tedious and weird, and nothing's explained here. And that's exactly why it vanished. Even Alice in Wonderland is pretty niche. Conspirators of Pleasure is even more so. It played at festivals, got a tiny release, and that was it. Javier Fesser is a respected director in Spain, made some mainstream work that did well there. In 1998, he made a comedy about a couple who want a child but don't understand how reproduction works. The whole movie is them trying to figure it out while increasingly absurd things happen. It's funny if you can handle the level of absurdity Fesser's working at. The problem is, most people can't. Even when you're laughing, you're not entirely sure what's happening or why. The movie crosses genres constantly, but never quite lands anywhere recognizable. Fesser's other work is way more popular. The Miracle is generally considered an unimportant footnote in his career. It's his imagination at its most unhinged, which also makes it his most uncommercial. It got small release in Europe and basically didn't exist anywhere else. Shinya Tsukamoto made Tetsuo the Iron Man, which became this legendary body horror film. So, in 1998, when he made Bullet Ballet, people expected that same frantic, violent energy. What they got was something slower and way more personal. Shot in black and white, about a man wandering through Tokyo after his girlfriend dies. It's got Tsukamoto's style, but it moves at this deliberate pace that throws people off. Even fans of Tsukamoto found it unnerving because they were waiting for the chaos to kick in. And it does eventually, but it takes its time. The movie's gorgeous and it pays off if you're patient, but most people weren't patient. Tetsuo is still discussed as a cult classic decades later. Bullet Ballet played at some festivals during the peak of Japanese horror in the 90s and then just vanished into Tsukamoto's filmography.